Okay, we're here today for a mill session interview with Sarge Frampton. Hello, Sarge.
Hiya.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks very much. Nice to see you.
Super. Now, your mill sessions I really enjoyed.
Thank you.
Not least because there was one of your country songs on there, Look Up To Me.
All right.
Yeah, great song. Written for Poacher?
It was written for Poacher, yes. Actually, it was inspired by a meeting I had with Paul Kennelly. And Paul Kennelly wrote a lot of songs and worked in Nashville. He did the White Mansions album and the tribute to Jesse James. And he came up to work with Poacher on one of my songs, which wasn't Look Up To Me. But I did have a lot of Paul's demos to listen to, the type of work that he did and the type of songs that he wrote. And the rhythm of Look Up To Me was inspired by some of the work that he'd done. So I just went off down that little creative road.
Super. Well, we'll talk more about your songwriting as we go,
Okay.
as we progress. I want to go back though right to the beginning. And you were born in Guernsey?
I was, yes. Channel Islands, yeah. Born and bred.
Born and bred. And you've been in Warrington now for a good while though?
I came up here after a mixed career in Guernsey in 1974.
Right. So before that, you were in a band called, were they My Generation?
My Generation, yeah. I've been working in dance bands since I was 15, so I was one of the bunch of teenagers that were actually getting paid. So it was useful for getting a bit of kit, and I was being noticed by different bands that came in to feature on some of the shows that we were doing, dance shows primarily. And I got a phone call, did I want to join this band, and some noted musicians from the band, and they were going to be doing Yardbirds and The Who and various other mid-60s kind of slightly non-pop, I think the beginning of the rock generation, if you like. So I said yes, and we started that, and we took part in a competition, and ended up being with the title of the Channel Islands top band.
That's not bad,
so that was me at 17 years old.
Great stuff. And am I right that you were writing songs back then as well?
I did write songs for them, yes.
Yeah.
As a result of that competition, we were offered the opportunity to go to London to take part in a national Battle of the Bands type competition in South London. I don't know, Streatham Ice Rink it was. Now, while we were there, we met up with some Guernsey performers who were working in London, one of which was Richard Loring, who was working in one of the West End shows at the time, an excellent singer and well known on that particular circuit. And he said, do you want to make a demo? Because I've got some friends and we could put you in a studio. So the answer to that was yes. Well, during the time I was working with the band, I was always keen on writing songs, and I'd written two songs. One was called Keep Left and the other one was called Getting Out, and they were part of our live show in a sort of a bluesy sort of way. Yeah. So anyway, we said, well, where shall we be? Well, get yourselves to Denmark Street. Okay, so we did that. Turned up at Regent Sound Studios, which is a very, very famous studio from that particular era. Although it's still there as a studio, it's not in that particular room where we recorded, which is now a shop. But I've since found out that it's actually a listed building, and so that particular room where we recorded is still the same as it was, although it's full of very expensive guitars now. Anyway, we went round the corner and borrowed a couple of amplifiers from one of the big music shops there, and went and did our session, and in the hope that we could pass that music on and possibly something would happen to it.
Now I know recording has always fascinated you as well.
Yes.
I know the band that you were in after My Generation, was it Ponder's End?
Ponder's End is the next band. What happened was the My Generation band only lasted a couple of years, and the reason was that I got to a point where I had to make a decision: did I want to go to college, or did I want to stay on the rock, as we call it, and find a different career? I opted to go to college, which obviously broke the band up in its tracks. Really, we had a big good night session at one of the local theatres, and then I buzzed off to London. Whilst I was in London, I met up with two old musician friends of mine from Guernsey were at different places. One was at Art College in London, and the other, Peter, was down on the south coast at Teacher Training College. And we met up in London to meet, have a beer, have a meal, go and watch a band, go to the Marquee in Wardour Street. And during that evening we said, you know what, we all miss playing, so when we go back for half term, why don't we, or Christmas, it would have been Christmas, why don't we put a band together
in Guernsey,
a power trio, like
right.
Cream,
yeah.
Or, and so that's exactly what we did. But what we did a bit of promotion before we went. We had a good chap, good friend of ours, Sam, who wrote a Saturday music column. So we let him know that this secret band was going to be performing. And we ended up doing 5 or 6 gigs during that short 2-3 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
And that was the start of a 6-year career for that band.
But you were recording the gigs. You recorded them and listened back to them, didn't you?
Yes. When I was about 12, my mum was always very keen on experimenting with, the new transistor radio, or I've just got this new TV and it's got sliding doors on it and all that stuff. We had a guest house, so she needed stuff that was working, not the stuff that you went and beat the heck out of it before you got a picture. So anyway, she turned up one day with this message machine. And I went, what'd you do with that? Well, you put a tape on it and you stick a microphone into it. Oh, microphone, 1, 2, hello, come in. And we started recording our voices, and that was kind of an epiphany, really. Never heard my voice before. So when I later became a teacher of technology, I used to get the guys, the 16, 17-year-old guys in recording classes, to record their voices because they'd never heard their voices before. And it was absolutely crazy to see the look on their face. That's not me, So I learned a lot about that. And because of I've actually still got a message tape with, I think it's 4 songs that I wrote for Ponder's End. One was called Little Red Car, and there were a couple of others. And I put that in a bank vault. And 30 years later, the bank got in touch with my mother, because I obviously wasn't living there. They said, oi, we've got this package with your son's name on, and we've had it here for 30 years. We're sending it back. Yeah. And it was this message tape. It was like something from a time, like a time warp.
This interested, the interest you had in recording, that when you find him, Ponder's End were a successful band. What kind of music was it you were doing?
Oh, it was a mixture. When we first started, it was like a power pop trio, really. Okay. Playing a mixture of blues and pop. Hendrix, Cream, Moody Blues, all sorts of different, Santana, lots of different influences. And I would record I bought a machine, and I would put a couple of mics up and record. And that was really to monitor what we were doing, what we were sounding like, and I wasn't using them. I couldn't actually broadcast them like today. You just stick it on the internet and everybody's listening to it.
Well, that love of recording. Am I correct that was one of the reasons when you left Guernsey, Ponder's End were coming to an end?
Yes.
You had a couple of options then, didn't you?
Yes. I mean, Ponder's End itself was quite experimental in lots of ways. But we came up through the late 60s kind of alternative style of music where 15-minute jam sessions were the order of things, really. Freakouts, they used to call. I can remember seeing a band at the Marquee one evening. It was we were just talking about it before, a band called The Gods, and Ken Hensley, who was the organ player, said we're going to have a freak out, and they did this huge thing, and he was a bit like Keith Emerson. He was turning his organ upside down, dropping it on the floor, making all sorts of noises. So that was the order of the day. It wasn't really it was experimental, but we didn't have the synthesizers, we didn't have the samplers, we didn't have all the kit that we've got today to make stuff really, really interesting. So we would just make a noise, basically. And we actually wrote, influenced by Tommy, we actually wrote a 25-minute suite of music called Compass, which was an imaginary version, round the world in 80 minutes rather than round the world in 80 days sort of thing. We performed that twice to a stacked out theatre, 500-seater, So the experimentation was going on, but we started to dry up a little. Because we were working, a hard-working band. We were working during the day, but we were also playing 5-6 nights a week in various clubs and venues.
It was sort of drawing to a close.
Yeah.
And you were sort of, when in Guernsey, there was a number of touring bands coming across.
Yes.
And you ended up with 2 offers on the table, didn't you?
In the same year, yes, that's right.
To go and leave Guernsey.
Yeah, I mean, Guernsey, back in that particular time, the 60s for sure, and the 70s, the tourism was still vibrant. And so therefore, there were cabaret seasons in all the hotels that had ballrooms. There were nightclubs, and the Savoy, which was a seafront hotel. It's gone now, sadly. It's just like flats now. But they had a big ballroom, and they started bringing over UK bands, professional bands, and 2 of them that came over that particular summer. One was Moving Finger, they were from Norwich, and the other was Maxwell Silver Hammer, who were from Warrington.
Okay.
And I got to know all those particular bands that came over, because quite often I'd be working till 2 o'clock in a club not far from there, and once they finished at 11:30, they'd come down for boogie.
Happy days, happy days. So the Maxwells, though, one of the things that appealed, and you did end up joining Maxwells, was the fact that they had some recording sessions on the horizon.
Yes, that's right. I mean, one of the things that you check out when you're talking to guys, because it's all very well with a pint of beer saying, do you want to join the band? Where will I live? How much money will I make, if possible? And are you doing any recording? Because recording was what I really wanted to do. And at that time in Guernsey, that we had made an album with Ponders End, but it was in an office block. And the machine was in one office, the drummer was in another, and the bass player and myself were in another. And amazingly, we all managed to play together and get an album out, and I've still got it. It's and sort of 75% of the songs on there were written by yours truly. But you can't do it without the band, who willingly want to go along for the ride as well. So Peter and Richard were very, very supportive of me doing that. So my interest in recording was being stomped up all the time. And this particular band from Warrington said, we're going into the studio, and we've got a songwriter who's written some songs for us, and we're going to be working with Tony Hatch. Ding! I've heard of him.
Oh, yeah. New face,
and Tony Hatch obviously was very, very big orchestrator, songwriter with Jackie Trent, and had his own publishing company. So that was an option for me. It was like a selling point for me to come up and give it a go. Come down to
These were
London.
a serious band potentially that were moving places.
They were a working band, not particularly rich working band, I'm sad to say, but we were doing the usual sort of northern cabaret club circuit from here to eternity.
So you were working with the Maxwells.
Yes.
But what about the songwriter David Parton? He sang, he wrote Isn't She Lovely for Stevie Wonder. He was a big part of your career.
Well, Des was actually the house songwriter that we were to work with.
Des being David
Des
Parton's-
David, yeah.
Des David.
Yeah, his nickname was Des. It's to do with his initials. So we met, and he was a very creative person, and I got on like a house on fire. My memory says we got on like a house on fire. We'd already done some demos of 2 of the tunes, I think, in a local Manchester studio. We went down to Edgware Road to the Pi Studios, which is now what used to be ATV Music and Pi Records. And that was my first time in a fully professional studio, the bee's knees basically. And Des was producing, but Tony actually did come down. Maxwell's were a very efficient vocal band, had harmonies, and I've always been a good harmonizer, so I fitted in really well with those boys. It was Glenn Morgan, Trevor Thomas, Frank and Malcolm, and those were the 4 guys. Everybody sang, and so we had quite a punchy harmony. It was the time of Mud and the Sweet, and they were bands that were knocking everybody dead at the time in the charts, and every manager in the world wanted their band to be on that road, you know. So we were managed by Derek Mack, as we all know him from round here. His agency was booking us out, so the agents would be saying, you need to be doing more of this type of thing, you need to be doing that, and whatever. So Des was the chap that was steering us through that experience. I still have those demos.
And you actually worked with Des, didn't you have a band called, was it Cyril Dagworth or something?
Yes, well that came a little bit later. During the 9 months that I was with Maxwell's, we were having a bit of a rough time with workload and everything. What happened was, during that summer, Des rang Glenn and asked him would he be interested in being in a band with him on bass. And Glenn said, well, that's okay, it sounds interesting, because we had a few hiccups with the Maxwell's issue. So he said, but Pete comes from Guernsey, and I brought him over here, so it's a room for him too. So he said, oh yeah, bring him down, it'd be great. Yeah, no problem. And he plays a bit of keyboards, he plays a bit of, you know, the usual thing. He could be a multi-musician, which I enjoy doing. And so that's what started out this working with Des Parton. He'd had an album which he'd recorded. He wanted a band. He had some friends from the Stoke-on-Trent area that had just returned from Germany. And lo and behold, we end up rehearsing some of that material, which was all self-penned by Des. But then he started offering the band the opportunity to put forward songs. And so we became a 6-piece writing band called Cyril Dagworth Players. Made one album back in the Pye Studios. It bombed, but I still play with George, the keyboard player, and John, the drummer, from that band.
And some of your songs
even to this day.
Were some of your songs on that album as
on
well?
that album, yes.
Super,
Yeah.
super.
I had one Ragamuffin Girl, which I sang on the album, and then I'd co-written another piece called Cyril's Theme, and you know, there was also contributions to other things, you know.
Right, okay. I want to now move on, if I may, to when Poacher came into your life. Now, Poacher, great Warrington country band.
Absolutely.
And I know you took a little break after Cyril Dagworth started working on Woolston Grange.
Yes, I did, yeah.
When did Poacher come into your life, and how did they come into your life?
Well, we came to a natural end. A lot of bands do try their very hardest to go forward, and no matter what you try and do, no matter how many songs you write, if you can't get the interest of the A&R people, you know, I mean, the marketing people said about our album, yeah, we've got it, we don't really like it, we're not going to promote it. And our manager banged on the table, so you've got to release it. Oh, yeah, we'll release it, but it escaped, you know. So once you get to that point, you've got you know, a slippery slope. You've got to find a way back. You've either got to reinvent yourselves or whatever. So it was time for me to move. So I was offered a job, and I ended up building speaker cabinets in the Grange. And there's a chap in this room, not too far from me right now, who was also doing pretty much the same as I was. You know, working for a living, building cabinets for rock bands. Brilliant. So during that time, Poacher were a band that were making waves on TV. They won New Faces, their heat of New Faces, and were about to perform in the gala performance at the end of the series. I was nowhere close at that time, but I'd been to see them in the studio with our friend Dave, and you know, they were a great sort of country band. And harmonious as well, and obviously very lively as well, and they really looked like they were enjoying what they were doing. Come the summer, I decided to go back to Guernsey for a break, and I was there and the phone rang, and it was their manager ringing me up to say, look, one of the lads has decided he can't carry on with the touring, which was pretty hectic. So they, as you live upstairs, I mentioned your name, and they went, oh yeah, okay, well, let's give him a go. So can you come back from Guernsey?
So you lived upstairs from where the manager
I did, yes.
worked?
I lived in a flat in Buttermarket Street.
Okay.
right next door to what is now Porter's.
Right.
It was called the Cross Keys. And I
I know
think
what
if
you
you can look that far, you can probably see the weather vane is still a Cross Keys
Right.
weather vane on the top of it. So I came back, met up, and we went up to the barn at the Old Crow in Newton-le-Willows, and we ran through some songs. I found that they weren't really what I'd call a country and western band. They were drawing songs from some of the more experimental sort of country rock, soft rock it was called back then, New Riders of the Purple Sage, and various bands that a lot of people over here probably didn't hear about because the radio wasn't playing them, you know. Anyway, that started, you know, rehearsal started in earnest. I learned the show, we went out, we were working 6 nights a week. But what had happened in that time between me being offered the chance to come over and work with them is that they set up the fact that they were going to go to the Tulsa International Festival in November in Oklahoma. So within a month or 6 weeks of joining the band, I was in Tulsa. That was just like, hello.
I believe you were working with some big names over there as well.
Well, the guy who organised the Tulsa show was head of a management company called Jim Halsey. And he managed Don Williams, Mel Tillis, Tammy Wynette, Roy Clark, you name it, in the country music circuit, especially the big ones that used to do Las Vegas and all that stuff. That's, you know, he was working with them. And so we were in good company, and he liked the band. We went down very well. And what had happened before I joined, the band Poacher had recorded their first album. And one song on that album was called Darling. I didn't play on that at all. And they released it about the same time as I joined the band. Unfortunately, what happened is that the songwriter also managed to get Frankie Miller to release it. And Frankie had the storming hit with it, you know. So, but what happened with us was very strange because it got licensed to America. So whilst we were in Tulsa, it actually went into the Billboard charts.
That's
although it was the bottom end of the charts, but that's enough for America. It's just like
a bit
great, you know. So our lifestyle changed very, very quickly. We got very well received in the arena at Tulsa, and then the doors started to open. People were thinking that perhaps we could tour with some of these big names, but it needed support from the record company. That was another issue that when we came back, it wasn't going to really work that way. Unfortunately, it meant we weren't going to start touring with these people in earnest in the States. But what it did mean is that we got offers to tour with Don Williams, Slim Whitman, Tammy Wynette.
Playing at Wembley, weren't you, as well?
Huh?
Playing at Wembley?
Yes. Mervyn Kong used to do an Easter weekend at the Wembley Festival. And a lot of these artists will come over around about that time so that they could tour the UK, doing all the theatres like the Apollos, Albert Hall, Festival Hall, some of the larger seaside resorts like the Brighton Dome and that sort of thing. But they'd also do Wembley, and they could do the Beeb and they'd do the interviews and all that. It was 2 weeks of hecticness. And we got to open the show for Don in 1979. And that was another eye-opener because suddenly we were doing all these fantastic venues and some of my songs, you know.
That you'd written, yeah. And one of the songs you've written, particular favourite of mine, Butter Market, that's been, you know, a lot of interest in that at the moment, isn't there?
Well, that's strange. It comes back to bite you sometimes. When we came back from Tulsa, we were in a very creative mode. Mm-hmm. One of the things that had happened whilst we were in Tulsa is we picked up a song, and the Halsey organisation helped us to get a studio session done. It was called Carolina Cowboy, and we never actually used it particularly, but it was that showed how far Halsey was was able to go. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can organise this, and we ended up working with a guy called Steve Ripley. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, but he was a really nice guy, great producer, and it gave me another experience in an American studio, which was lovely. Also, I was, because of that particular group of people that I was introduced to, I was taken to Tulsa Studios, which was quite a new one, and introduced to Roy Clark and Clarence Gatemouth Brown, who were making a record together. And it gave me a real insight into how these guys were doing it, because we were talking about experimenting in the 60s where 15-minute jam was the kind of thing you were doing. In those studios, they had 2 multi-track recorders that were syncing, and they would just carry on recording. So 20 minutes later, they're still jamming in the studio, and you know, you've run out of tape, but the next one's picked it up, and the tape editor will put the 2 together. Yeah. So that was the highlight of that little trip for me, was to meet Roy Clark. But serendipity is that Roy Clark came over here to play Mildenhall and asked could he have that band Poacher that he met while he was in Tulsa.
Wow.
And so it was like, wow, so here we go. We went down to Mildenhall, and BBC Two recorded the show. I haven't got a copy of that, but it really opened the door at the BBC for Poacher.
Yeah. Do you know, you've got such a career behind you already here, Sarge. I know Poacher came back, and you know, they were a good touring band here in the UK for a long time.
Yes, that's right.
Eventually, Poacher came to an end, but I think the band you formed after that were the Escape Committee, and
correct.
And they're still performing today. So
correct.
You're still performing with them.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating talking to you. And where can people see you these days?
Well, I don't play in Warrington very much, I must admit. The scene, gig scene, sadly, has changed quite a lot. Also, as a teacher of some decades, I also like to see the youngsters coming up and doing it. So I don't really want to be going out there 5 nights a week and stopping the new generation of kids going out and getting the gigs. But I am playing. I've got a reputation down in Stoke-on-Trent because of the Cyril Dagworth players and the guys that I play with. So I do play on a fairly regular basis with my friends called the Barflies. I've been sort of standing in for their lead guitar player, who's recuperating. And the Escape Committee, as you rightly say, in one form or another, is still actually a gigging option, and I'll be playing in Newcastle-under-Lyme at the end of February. That's next week.
Okay.
So
if people are watching it fresh out of the can, this video, they might be able to
yes,
see that.
well, you know, you can find me on YouTube for sure, Framo, and there's all sorts of live recordings, because I archive stuff, and if I play a venue and they're recording it, I ask for that. Sometimes it's videoed, and I just store it and edit it and store it.
And you're still writing?
Still writing, yeah.
That's great.
Usually by the time I've got down to the bottom of the stairs to make my coffee for breakfast, I've usually got something churning away.
And the mill sessions, the fantastic mill sessions you've done, some of those are quite recent songs as well.
Yeah. One of them, the love song, was written last summer. And then Look Up To Me goes back to those days from the Paul Kennelly days. I can't remember what.
People can check them out, the mill sessions.
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and what Ray's doing here is amazing.
And if people want to know more about you, you say you're on Facebook? And
I am on Facebook as Sarge.
Yeah,
Sarge Frampton.
Sarge Frampton.
And I've got a gigs page, but YouTube, you just check out Framo, and you'll see a whole bunch of stuff with remote lockdown sessions and videos and stuff like that. Stay active.
Yeah, you got to.
That's the way.
You've got to. Listen, it's been fascinating listening to your tales.
Thanks very much.
You're going back. You go back to Guernsey quite regular as well, so it's going full circle, isn't it?
I'm gigging in June. Yeah, it's already booked in, and I've got my group of friends over there, long-standing friends. That bass player Pete that I was talking about, he's the bass player.
Okay.
That goes back to school days.
All right. Well, some of us might struggle to get to Guernsey, but never fear.
Cheap. It's cheap. You can do it.
Never fear. Just check out the mill sessions that Pete's done. They really are fantastic. And again, Pete, Sarge, thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot. There you go.